Hey guys, tonight we drift back, way back, into a world where the land is shaped not by machines or motors, but by the slow, steady breath of a river. You're not in your bed anymore. You're floating, gently, down the Nile. The stars are smeared across the black velvet of the sky. Papyrus reeds sway beside you. Frogs croak, hippos grunt in the dark, and somewhere in the distance, drums tap out a rhythm older than memory. You're about to step into ancient Egypt. Not the blockbuster Egypt with golden sarcophagi and booby-trapped tombs. Though, don't worry, we'll get to that. No, this is Egypt before Egypt. Before pharaohs and pyramids. Just sleepy riverbanks, fishing villages, and that one guy who insists on wearing a leopard pelt to dinner. And you probably won't survive this. There are crocodiles, floods, and a general lack of plumbing. You're a soft, modern mammal with strong opinions about almond milk. But for now, try to forget all that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing who's drifting off across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You float along the Nile, watching the edges of the river curl into farmland. It's green here, even thousands of years ago. The annual flooding has left behind thick, rich silt, fertile as a dream. You step ashore, and your feet squish into mud older than your last 5 houseplants combined. Villages dot the landscape, clusters of reed huts where people herd cattle, bake bread in open clay ovens, and carefully avoid discussing politics. You smell wood smoke, hear children laughing, and notice that almost everyone has killer eyeliner, even the goat herders. Kohl wasn't just for style, it kept sand and sun out of their eyes. Practical and dramatic. You respect it. These early Egyptians don't know they're Egyptians yet. This is pre-dynastic Egypt, sometime around 4000 BCE, and people are still figuring things out, like farming, trade, and how to not get stepped on by your neighbor's ceremonial hippo statue. But even now, something's stirring. You feel it under your toes, in the hush of morning. It's more than just mud and millet. These people are weaving together the habits, beliefs, and mud brick foundations of a civilization that will outlive almost everything. Their gods are already gathering. Falcons, jackals, river spirits. You see little clay figurines tucked under doorways, painted in ochre, with eyes that somehow seem to blink when you're not looking. You pass shrines that smell of crushed herbs, hear chants rising with the smoke. The spiritual world is everywhere, sewn into fishing nets, painted on pots, carved into the handles of knives made of flint. Trade is beginning, too. You spot a boat, thin as a leaf, gliding upriver. Its crew shouts greetings to a nearby village, offering obsidian from the Red Sea or copper trinkets from Sinai. Their sails flap lazily, stitched from woven reeds. And you think, this is how globalization begins, in sandals. But not everything is peaceful. You hike inland and find burial mounds, the first experiments in status. Some graves are simple pits, others have offerings, ivory combs, lapis beads, a pet turtle. Someone is starting to say, I mattered more than you. And with that quiet boast, the long shadow of kingship begins to stretch over the valley. You wander deeper into the southern reaches, Upper Egypt, oddly named because it's upriver. And here, the settlements seem older, tougher, and maybe a little snobbier. The pottery's fancier. People have tattoos. A few even ride on sleds dragged by other people, which you're pretty sure is not very union-friendly. Meanwhile, in Lower Egypt, down north, because Egyptian geography insists on confusing everyone, there's a different vibe. Swamps, birds, cities with names like Buto and Sais, where fishing is a lifestyle and papyrus grows as thick as traffic cones. The Nile splits into branches here, forming a lush delta. Trade booms. Language starts taking shape. Not just grunts and nods, but symbols etched into bone and pottery. You crouch beside one such pot, fingers tracing spirals and strange, pointy creatures. It's not quite writing yet, but it's getting there. Soon enough, scribes will turn symbols into sentences, carving stories into stone that outlast storms and empires. Historians still argue whether Upper Egypt really conquered Lower Egypt, or if they just sent really persuasive emissaries with gold and good wine. But what matters is this: the two lands begin to eye each other. Rival chiefs sharpen their flint knives, messengers ride donkeys with scrolls tied to their tails, and somewhere, in a palace made of mud brick and ambition, a man named Narmer is sharpening his crown game. But that's for the next section. For now, you settle into the rhythm of early Egyptian life. You learn to fish with a net, sleep under palm-frond roofs, and try not to accidentally insult someone's favorite hippo god. You help paint a communal wall, your brush dipped in red ochre and soot, sketching figures with arms raised to the sun. At night you lie on a woven mat and listen to the croak of frogs and the distant roar of a lion across the water. Someone hands you a jar of beer. It's thick, chewy, more like oatmeal soup than a drink, but it gets the job done. The stars wheel above, familiar yet distant. And even here, in this first hush of civilization, you can sense the centuries unspooling ahead, the pyramids, the pharaohs, the scandals, the glories, the sandstorms that will bury and reveal it all again. But tonight, you're just one more soul at the water's edge, lulled by the gentle breathing of the Nile. You wake with the smell of river mist in your nose and silt between your toes. The sun is stretching up over the palms now, and something's changed in the air. More tense, more electric. You hear it in the chatter of market stalls, feel it in the thump of drums echoing across the riverbanks. This isn't just another sleepy Nile morning. This is a power grab. You follow a slow procession moving toward a wide clearing. There, ringed by onlookers and guards with impressively unnecessary spears, stands a tall man with the kind of crown you'd expect from someone trying very hard to make a point. That's Narmer, or depending on which side of Egypt you're asking, Menes. History gets fuzzy here. The two names might belong to the same guy, or maybe to two different pharaohs who got merged like a Netflix reboot. But whoever he is, this guy's about to do something big. Unite Egypt. You blink, and the crown on his head changes. Now it's white, tall like an upside-down bowling pin. That's the Hedjet, the crown of Upper Egypt. A moment later, he swaps it for a red, curled crown like a coiled snake. Lower Egypt's Deshret. And then, poof, he's wearing both. One stacked awkwardly on the other like a child wearing two bicycle helmets. It's not a fashion statement. It's a declaration. These lands are now one. Kind of, mostly. There's still the occasional border skirmish and a few governors who are like, "Excuse me, who do you think you are?" But for the first time, the Nile Valley pulses as a single body, and you're standing at the very heart of that transformation. It's around 3100 BCE, and Narmer doesn't waste time. He builds a capital at a place called Memphis. No, not that Memphis. And he gets to work on what all strong rulers love: admin, taxes, ledgers, state-sponsored grain production. Exciting bedtime stuff, right? But it works. Roads link cities, irrigation expands, and in this hotbed of bureaucratic glory, you get your first taste of early hieroglyphs. Picture a falcon, a folded cloth, a loaf of bread, and somehow that equals royal decree. You squint. There's no Rosetta Stone yet, so you're mostly just guessing. But it's clear the scribes are starting to run the show. Ink, after all, is more permanent than bronze. You wander through Memphis, the brand new royal city. It's not all marble columns and golden gates, more like a dusty, bustling collection of adobe courtyards and wooden platforms. But there's a vibe. It's the startup phase of an empire. Still, even in these earliest days, Egypt knows how to show off. You pass through open-air temples where incense curls like smoke signals, and priests chant to Horus and Hathor and gods that haven't even hit their final mythic form yet. You sneak a peek at Narmer's court. A mix of hardened generals, anxious advisors, and that one guy who's always trying to turn things into a religious movement. And then you spot it. The Narmer Palette. It's a massive shield-shaped slab of slate, held up reverently by two attendants. Carved into it is a story. A flex, really. On one side, Narmer smashes the skull of some unfortunate rival. On the other, he marches proudly, decapitated enemies stacked at his feet like a particularly macabre Costco receipt. And front and center? The god Horus, already sponsoring his favorite new monarch. It's propaganda before propaganda knew it was propaganda. Think of it as ancient Instagram, curated, dramatic, and edited for divine lighting. Historians still argue whether this palette depicts a real event or just royal wishful thinking. Either way, it works. You feel the myth settling in. This is a man chosen by the gods, or at least a man who hired good stonemasons. You slip away from the court, back toward the everyday folk. They're less concerned with palettes and more with harvesting flax, feeding oxen, and trying to figure out how many gods is too many. You lend a hand weaving a basket, and someone hands you a necklace made of shells and cowrie beads. It's a simple life, but full of rhythm. Birth, harvest, flood, repeat. And speaking of floods, here comes the Nile again, swelling like clockwork. The inundation is a blessing and a curse. It brings fresh soil, sure, but also swamps out roads, floods granaries, and drowns your sandal if you're not paying attention. You help build a canal, and for a moment you wonder, was this the first civilization with seasonal waterproofing? As night falls, you notice something curious. Narmer's name is written inside a little oval called a serek. It looks like a mini fortress with a falcon perched on top. The name inside it? That's sacred. That's power. Soon all pharaohs will get one, actually 5 names, because apparently one just doesn't cut it when you're divine royalty. You fall asleep to the sound of frogs and distant flutes, your head resting on a woven reed pillow. You dream of twin lands made one, of falcons circling high above the floodplains, and of crowns stacked like fancy Tupperware. It's early yet. Egypt is still figuring itself out. But you can already feel the heartbeat of empire thudding beneath the soil. You're back under the blazing Egyptian sun, and guess what? You've been promoted. Not to pharaoh, don't get greedy, but to a humble worker on one of the grandest construction sites the world has ever known. A pyramid. And yes, your back already hurts. The year is somewhere around 2600 BCE, and Egypt has officially entered the Old Kingdom, that shimmering golden age when kings start calling themselves gods and stone becomes the material of choice for making a point. Massive, eternal points. You're standing on the edge of a wide limestone plateau. In front of you rises a jagged staircase of stone. The step pyramid of Djoser. It's not smooth and polished yet, but it's the first real pyramid, and to be honest, it looks like a ziggurat and a cake stand had a baby. Djoser's the pharaoh who commissioned it, but the real brain behind the build is a name you won't forget. Imhotep, high priest, vizier, chief architect, healer, probable overachiever. He'll eventually be deified, one of the only commoners to land a spot in the Egyptian God Hall of Fame. Historians still argue whether he really did all the things he's credited with, or if later generations just added stuff to his resume like ancient hype men. But what is real is the noise, the dust, the sheer, brutal physicality of pyramid building. You join a work crew, heaving limestone blocks along ramps slick with water and crushed reeds. The sun is punishing. You haven't seen a cloud in 6 weeks, and you're pretty sure someone's donkey just ate your lunch. Despite the popular myth, you're not a slave. You're a paid laborer, sort of. You get food, shelter, a haircut once a month if you're lucky, and possibly some ancient beer that tastes like barley soup mixed with dishwater. Still, your mates joke around, slap your back, and collectively complain about the foreman, who insists he knows what he's doing despite having very clear ramp design issues. You carve out a break in the shade and admire the scale of it all. Above you, workers are installing polished limestone casing stones, meant to shine in the sun like the wings of a giant god. Below, scribes take notes on little tablets, keeping track of who moved what, how fast, and whether that guy with the bad knee is faking it again. Egypt's not messing around. Pharaohs now command thousands, and their reach stretches across the deserts and into Nubia, across the Red Sea to Byblos and beyond. Trade booms. Ships arrive with cedar wood, ivory, and curious items labeled miscellaneous offerings. You catch a glimpse of Pharaoh Sneferu next, he of the 3 pyramids. Because why settle for one when you can keep experimenting? His first try, the Medum Pyramid, kind of collapses. The second, the bent pyramid, literally changes angles halfway up. But by his third go, the red pyramid, he nails it. You wonder if his architects ever had group therapy. Then comes Khufu. You've probably heard of him. He builds the Great Pyramid at Giza, which, for a brief moment in the universe's history, is the tallest man-made structure on Earth. It stays that way for over 3,800 years. And yes, it's the one that still stands today, big enough to fit 20 Empire State Buildings worth of stone. But Khufu himself, bit of a mystery. No statues survive of him. His only confirmed likeness is a palm-sized ivory figurine that looks like it belongs in a dollhouse museum. And yet his pyramid is so immense it makes modern cruise ships blush. You wander through Giza's shadow. Not just Khufu's pyramid, but also the slightly smaller ones built by his son Khafre and grandson Menkaure. Then, of course, there's the Sphinx, that lion-bodied, human-headed guardian who stares eternally toward the east with that "I haven't had coffee yet" expression. Historians still debate who exactly it represents. Khafre? Khufu? Your cousin Larry? No one's quite sure. You try to ask it. It doesn't respond. Back behind the scenes, life for the common folk isn't all monuments and muscle cramps. You slip into one of the limestone-walled houses. It's cozy. Low benches, rush mats, a shrine in the corner with little statues of household gods. Someone hands you a stew of lentils and leeks. And honestly, it slaps. There's art, too. The walls of tombs are covered in vivid paintings, fishing scenes, market trips, and occasional moments of, "Look how great my life was. Please don't haunt me." The Egyptians believe in Ma'at, cosmic balance, and that means your soul had better leave behind some flattering reviews. That's why tombs are packed with goods, food, tools, even board games. You watch a scribe finish carving a spell onto a tomb wall, whispering words that will guide the deceased through the underworld like a GPS powered by divine poetry. And let's not forget the bureaucracy. Egypt, even now, runs on paperwork. You pass a temple where priests carefully record daily offerings. 4 loaves, 2 jars of beer, 1 slightly wilted lettuce. The gods are demanding, and they are very into accounting. But trouble is already brewing. You hear murmurs from the hinterlands, governors growing bold, officials acting like kings. The central government is strong, yes, but it's also bloated, and a little too obsessed with legacy. Spoiler alert, when everyone's busy building giant tombs, no one's paying attention to the grain stores. But you've still got time. For now, the old kingdom glows. You recline on a rooftop, sipping something suspiciously like fermented dates, watching the sun set behind a stone skyline that touches the heavens. The pyramids are rising, the Nile is flowing, and Egypt, for the moment, is as eternal as it wants to be. Morning again, and you're floating. Not metaphorically, literally. You're on a wide papyrus boat, bobbing gently on the Nile, the breeze warm against your face. The reeds rustle beside you, herons flap lazily overhead, and from a nearby village you hear the hypnotic rhythm of a hand drum calling out like a heartbeat. Egypt is still here, but something's shifted. The pyramids still stand, but the golden age that birthed them? That's yesterday's news. You're now drifting into Egypt's first intermediate period, a time that's, how do we put this gently, a bit of a mess. The old kingdom has collapsed. And no, not with a dramatic bang or alien invasion, although you'll hear a few late-night theorists claim otherwise. It crumbled the way old empires do, slowly, bureaucratically, and with a lot of passive-aggressive letters. You dock your boat near what used to be a loyal provincial capital. Now? It's got some strong, independent contractor energy. Nomarchs, those regional governors, have gone full diva. Once content to carry out Pharaoh's orders, they're now running their own courts, building their own mini-pyramids, and tossing around titles like "He who controls all the cows in the West." You step into a small palace and find the local ruler sitting on a low dais, sipping wine, dictating policy, and wearing enough gold to fund 3 irrigation projects. The scribes scurry around him, but there's no sense of coordination with the rest of Egypt. It's like everyone decided group projects were overrated. And things aren't just politically fractured, they're environmentally cursed. The Nile has stopped behaving. Some years, it barely floods at all. That might sound nice until you remember the entire country relies on that flood to grow food. With poor harvests come famine, and with famine comes unrest. You see villagers rationing grain, mothers bartering jewelry for bread, priests praying to any god that'll listen. And there are a lot of them by now. You visit a once prosperous town and find the granaries nearly empty, graffiti scrawled on walls, and a strange silence where music used to echo. You overhear one farmer mutter, "The gods must be angry." Another replies, "Or maybe we just forgot how to rotate crops." Historians still argue whether the first intermediate period was a true dark age or just an awkward, decentralized phase. You know, like puberty, but for a nation. Either way, the unity of Upper and Lower Egypt is now just a memory, and there are 2 main powers vying for control: Heracleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south. Thebes is the scrappy underdog. They've got charisma, religious fervor, and a rising noble house led by guys named Intef. Like a lot of Intefs. Intef the First, Intef the Second, Intef the Third. It's a whole thing. You can't swing a date palm without bumping into an Intef trying to unify Egypt. Heracleopolis, meanwhile, is flashier, richer, better connected, but deeply entangled in palace drama. You walk through its halls and hear whispers of coups, suspicious deaths, and grain bribery. Classic. You start to sense that Thebes might win this civil spat. Not because they're stronger, but because they believe in something. Specifically, in Amun, a god of air and hidden things, who's about to go from local deity to top-tier pantheon boss. Thebes eventually produces a man named Mentuhotep II. Now there's a name with some weight. You watch him walk calmly through temple courtyards, his every step measured, his voice soft but unyielding. He doesn't scream unity, he whispers it, and people listen. His armies are well trained, his priests persuasive, and his timing, frankly, excellent. By 2040 BCE, Mentuhotep unites Egypt again under a single rule. You witness his coronation at Thebes, drums pounding, incense flooding the air, the people chanting his new royal title, he who gives life to the two lands. You smile. Egypt's back. But something's different now. This isn't a return to the pyramid-building god-king days of the Old Kingdom. No, the Middle Kingdom is about practicality, restoration, and maybe just a dash of trauma recovery. It's like a nation coming out of therapy. You tour the new administrative system. It's tighter, more centralized. Those nomarchs? Still around, but on much shorter leashes. You see tablets filled with detailed tax records, shipment lists, temple inventories. It's all very Excel sheet energy. Art and literature flourish, but it's darker now, more introspective. You hear recitations of the tale of the eloquent peasant, where a humble man delivers poetic speeches about justice to deaf ears, and the prophecies of Neferti, which paints the chaos of the past as a cautionary tale. Egypt is processing its collapse the only way it knows how, by carving it into stone and turning it into a parable. You find Mentuhotep's tomb at Deir el-Bahri, tucked into the cliffs above Thebes. It's not a pyramid. It's a blend of temple and tomb, architectural ambition tempered with humility. You sit on a ledge nearby, legs dangling, watching the sun spill over the limestone. It's beautiful. It's grounded. It's Egypt reimagining itself. And as the Middle Kingdom rises, so do its borders. You join a caravan heading south into Nubia, where Egypt's looking for gold, trade routes, and strategic forts. The relationship with Nubia is complicated. 1 part diplomacy, 2 parts conquest. You share bread with local chiefs and watch Egyptian governors build outposts with walls, gates, and little temples to gods the locals barely recognize. Yet even here, Egypt's influence takes root. You see Nubian artisans wearing Egyptian jewelry, using Egyptian words, blending their traditions with those of the Nile. Back north, the Middle Kingdom hits its stride under a series of capable rulers. Amenemhat I moves the capital to Ichtawi, try saying that 5 times fast, and reinforces Egypt's internal cohesion. His son, Senusret I, expands temples and builds like there's no tomorrow. One day you stumble into a scribal school teaching the next generation to write, read, and flatter their bosses creatively. But even amid prosperity, there's paranoia. Pharaohs build secret tombs far from their visible monuments, hoping to foil grave robbers. You walk past decoy chambers, false doors, and trap corridors. Ancient security systems, minus the lasers. And through it all, you see the Egyptians clinging to Ma'at, that fragile balance of order, truth, and justice. They've seen what happens when it falters. So now, as the wind brushes through tall grasses along the Nile, you breathe in a moment of calm. Egypt has stumbled, risen, and learned. It's stronger now, wiser. A little scarred, sure, but still dreaming. You wake to the scent of incense and damp stone. Your bed is a woven mat in a quiet Middle Kingdom temple, and outside, the first orange slivers of dawn are spilling across the Nile's mirror-still surface. You stretch, step into your sandals, and rejoin Egypt in what might be its most underappreciated era, a golden age with better accounting. The Middle Kingdom is humming, efficient, ambitious, and occasionally anxious. Egypt has found its rhythm again, but this time with less obsession over ego-sized tombs and more interest in border control, grain quotas, and infrastructure projects. Honestly, it's like watching a once flashy rock band settle into their critically acclaimed, grown-up acoustic album. You begin your day in Ichtawi, the relatively new capital in the Fayum region. No, it's not as iconic as Memphis or Thebes, and no, you can't point to it on a map today. Archaeologists still debate where exactly it was located. Historians love a mystery, and this city remains one of Egypt's most tantalizing "Where's Waldo" scenarios. But in its time, it's the nerve center of a more thoughtful Egypt. Streets buzz with scribes, priests, tax collectors, and administrators all shuffling papyri like caffeinated interns. There's a nervous energy to the place. Leaders are still haunted by how fast things collapsed last time. So now, overcompensation. Triple copies of records, redundant command chains, backup grain silos next to backup gods. You shadow a scribe through his day. He's got ink-stained fingers, a bored expression, and a flair for passive-aggressive poetry. His name is Intef, not that Intef, a different one, and he spends his mornings recording harvest yields and his evenings composing odes to the truly fair administrator who pays on time. In the countryside, you see Egypt nurturing not just cities, but hearts. The Fayum Depression is being transformed into a fertile crescent by new irrigation canals, bringing life to previously dry soil. Farmers here speak of Pharaoh Amenemhat III in tones usually reserved for saints. His statue stares blankly at the canal you sit beside, and you could swear his granite eyes are quietly judging your posture. Amenemhat III builds mighty projects like the labyrinth at Hawara. That's not just legend. It's a massive complex with hundreds of rooms, meant to dazzle visiting dignitaries and possibly confuse incoming grave robbers to death. Herodotus would later rave about it, though historians still argue whether he ever actually saw it or just repeated an ancient TripAdvisor review. But beneath this era of order, you start to notice cracks. First, the royal line gets a little wobbly. Multiple co-regencies and overlapping claims pop up, as if pharaohs just couldn't decide who should handle the divine inbox. It's like Egypt's running a government where everyone's acting manager, but no one wants to clean the divine break room. Then there's the growing dependence on mercenaries and immigrants. You meet people from Nubia, Libya, and Canaan working within Egypt, living in border towns, marrying locals. On one hand, it's multicultural brilliance. On the other, a brewing identity crisis. You travel south to Buhen, one of Egypt's southern forts. The sun here is white-hot and blinding, reflecting off the polished shields of Egyptian troops stationed to guard the gold trade routes. You sit beside one soldier who tells you in a quiet voice about frequent skirmishes, the taste of dust, and the odd camaraderie of a border town where language barriers are overcome, mostly by shared bread and eye rolls. He introduces you to a Kushite trader named Nari. She brings incense, panther pelts, and laughter into the market stalls. Her Egyptian is rough, but she gestures eloquently, slipping you a small amulet, half scarab, half something older. "For luck," she says. You nod, not entirely sure whether you should be charmed or worried. Egypt, despite its resurgence, is no longer alone in the world. To the northeast, the Levant is bustling with new city-states, trading routes, and rival cultures who have read Egypt's playbook and taken notes. That's how the Hyksos enter the story. Slowly, at first. They arrive as traders and settlers from Canaan, perhaps invited in times of need. You stroll through Avaris, their stronghold in the Nile Delta. It feels Egyptian, sort of, but with odd twists. Foreign weapons, new musical instruments, even different pottery styles. You try the local beer. It's lighter, crisper, and definitely made by someone who's had to survive hotter summers than yours. Over time, these newcomers begin to exert influence. They bring horses and chariots. Yes, that's right, actual horses, which Egypt didn't have before. Watching a horse-powered chariot speed past you on the dusty delta roads, you realize this changes everything. But for now, the Hyksos aren't invaders. They're neighbors, landlords, power brokers, Egypt doesn't fall to a wave of violence. It fades into fragmentation again. You return to Thebes and find the local dynasty asserting itself, but not with much punch. Pharaohs here still act divine, but more like local celebrities than god-kings. They host festivals, commission modest temples, and occasionally argue with their priests about incense budgets. You lean against a wall in the temple of Karnak, watching the shadows lengthen. Thebes has potential, but it needs a spark. The Hyksos rule the north. The native kings hold the south. And in the middle? Egypt waits. There's a quiet tension now, like the moment before a storm, or the pause before a choir starts to sing. Everyone's glancing sideways, waiting for something, someone, to bring back the flame of unity. And you? You tighten the scarf around your neck, dust off your sandals, and head back to the river. Because this story? It's just getting warmed up. It's nighttime again, and you're standing at the edge of the desert, where the stars come alive and the wind tells stories if you know how to listen. A crescent moon floats above the Theban cliffs, and the Nile glistens like a ribbon of spilled ink. Things feel tense. Egypt is once again split in two. In the north, the Hyksos rule from avarice, their stronghold in the Nile Delta, where foreign gods mingle with native ones, and chariots kick up the dust in a new kind of warfare. In the south, Thebes clings to sovereignty like a cat refusing to be bathed, scrappy, proud, and hissing at anyone who calls them secondary. You wander through the dim streets of Thebes, where people speak in low tones. The Theban dynasty is now in what scholars later call the Second Intermediate Period, which is history's fancy way of saying, this part's a bit confusing. Records are sparse, alliances blurry, and half the rulers are named either Sobekotep or Sekenenre. You'd need a flowchart, a red pen, and probably a bottle of date wine to follow it all. But one name cuts through the murk: Sekenenre Tau. You see him first in a smoky war council. His face is sharp, his voice low, and his crown sits slightly askew, as if even he's not sure how much power he really holds. But when he speaks of the Hyksos, his eyes flash like a flint about to spark. He's tired of the insults, of letters from the Hyksos king demanding that Thebes remove its hippos because their bellowing is disturbing his sleep up in Avaris. Yes, this is a real complaint in a real letter. Ancient diplomacy was wild. Sekenenre isn't having it. He begins organizing resistance. Quietly at first, smuggling weapons, forging alliances, rallying troops. You follow one of his messengers down a moonlit road, carrying papyri hidden inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread. Spycraft, Egyptian style. But rebellion is dangerous work, and you soon hear whispers. Sekenenre's been killed. You see his mummy much later, on a dusty museum table in your imagination. His skull cracked open, deep wounds marking a violent end. Historians still argue whether he died in battle or was assassinated in his sleep. Either way, Thebes has a martyr now, and it has a reason to rise. You meet his sons, Kamose and later Amose. Kamose takes up the fight like it's personal, which it absolutely is. You watch him launch a daring raid northward, catching the Hyksos off guard. His troops march fast and light, singing war hymns to Amun, god of hidden strength. Kamose returns victorious, but doesn't live long after. Some say illness, others say enemy blades. Egypt doesn't pause to debate it. Instead, his brother Amose steps up. And here, in this moment, you feel the narrative shift. Amos is young, but not naive. He trains relentlessly, consults his generals, and builds one of the earliest standing navies. You sail with him as he leads a flotilla of warships down the Nile, sun gleaming off their bronze-tipped prows. The campaign against the Hyksos is brutal and brilliant. You witness siege tactics at Avaris, soldiers tunneling beneath walls, priests chanting from makeshift altars, and chariots clashing in a cloud of arrows and dust. It's Egypt at war, and it is terrifying. Eventually, the Hyksos fall. Ahmose drives them out, not just of the Delta, but across the Sinai and back into Canaan. Egypt doesn't just reclaim its land, it plants its flag on foreign soil. The people celebrate. Temples erupt in festivals. Musicians pour into the streets, flutes and drums echoing through the alleys of Thebes. You sip cool beer under a swaying palm and listen to a woman sing, her voice lifting thanks to Amun, who has now fully ascended to top god status. Ahmose's victory marks the birth of the new kingdom, Egypt's imperial phase, where it stops playing defense and starts writing the rules. Back in Thebes, monumental building projects begin. You visit the Temple of Karnak again, but it's grown. New pylons, towering obelisks, sacred lakes. The scent of sandstone dust and lotus flowers fills the air. Ahmose doesn't just build for gods, he builds for memory. He commissions detailed records, reliefs of battles, family lineages. Egypt has learned the price of forgetting. And he's not the only one. You watch as Queen Ahmose Nefertari, his wife and sister, yes, that's still a thing, steps into the public eye. She's not just royal window dressing. She holds religious power, oversees temple rites, and becomes the first woman to hold the title God's Wife of Amun. Her cult grows so strong that people are still worshipping her centuries later, lighting lamps and whispering prayers to her name. Together, they create a legacy that stabilizes Egypt for generations. You visit newly organized schools, where scribes teach children to write elegant prose. One scroll you peek at reads, "Be a scribe." It saves you from hard labor. You will not become sunburnt like the builder. Ancient propaganda was oddly relatable. Now that Egypt controls more territory, foreign contact booms. You trade goods in marketplaces where Nubian gold, Syrian glass, and Cretan pottery blend into one swirling feast for the eyes. Egypt becomes the center of a growing, buzzing web of civilization. But expansion brings challenges. You hear murmurs of restlessness from the fringes, rebellions in Nubia, border skirmishes in Canaan, rival kingdoms watching from afar. You lean against a sandstone wall, listening to a general mutter, "Peace is a nice idea, but it doesn't collect tribute." Still, Egypt thrives. The scars of the Hyksos era fade, but not entirely. You notice the new fortresses along the eastern delta, the rebuilt city of Avaris now shadowed by military watchtowers. Egypt remembers, and it does not intend to be caught off guard again. That night, you wander into the hills west of Thebes. The stars are out in full force, and somewhere below you, the Valley of the Kings is beginning to take shape. No more pyramids. Pharaohs have learned their lesson. These tombs are hidden, nestled in dry ravines, masked by cliffs. Safety through secrecy. You crouch near one, its entrance barely visible under moonlight. A stoneworker passes by, covered in white dust, humming a hymn to Amun. He gives you a nod that says, "We're building something that will last." And Egypt? Egypt is just getting started. You wake with the scent of crushed acacia in your nose and the warmth of sunlight pouring over Thebes like liquid gold. A deep thrum pulses through the capital, part celebration, part ambition, and part just the noise of workers chiseling hieroglyphs before breakfast. It's a golden morning in the new kingdom, and Egypt has finally remembered how to flex. Your sandals crunch over the gravel of a vast temple courtyard. Karnak, again, but even larger now. Colossal columns rise around you like a petrified forest, each carved with stories of gods and kings, each topped with a capital like a blooming papyrus. Every stone sings the praises of a single name, Thutmose I. You see him in bas relief, triumphant, muscles rippling unrealistically as he smites some poor foe. It's definitely exaggerated, but hey, propaganda is half the point of pharaohing. Thutmose isn't just posturing. He's the first to push Egypt's borders as far as the Euphrates. That's modern-day Iraq, if you're keeping score. You ride with his army, chariots rattling, war drums pounding like a very angry heartbeat, as Egypt declares to the world, "We are done playing defense." To the south, Thutmose secures Nubia with brutal efficiency. You drift down the Nile behind his campaign boats, past conquered forts where Egyptian flags flap in wind that tastes of granite and conquest. Egypt doesn't just occupy Nubia now. It absorbs it, mines its gold, and enlists its elite archers. The famed Medjay become Egypt's most trusted warriors, desert-born and unflinchingly loyal. You share a meal with one, under stars and flint hills. He speaks few words but hands you a charm carved from black stone, a token of protection or a warning, possibly both. But Egypt isn't all war and taxes. Back at court, you meet someone different, someone quietly legendary. Hatshepsut. At first, she's the queen, wife of Thutmose II, tucked neatly into palace life like a decorative vase. But when he dies early, possibly of a bad heart or worse gossip, Hatshepsut takes power, not as regent, not quietly, but fully. Pharaoh style. And here's the kicker. She doesn't give it back. You walk with her through the vast limestone colonnades of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. The thing is a masterpiece, terraced, symmetrical, serene, more spa than fortress. But it's not just beautiful, it's political genius. Every inch reinforces her divine legitimacy. Reliefs show her born of Amun himself, suckling at a goddess's breast, chosen by the gods to rule. It's basically the world's first corporate rebrand. Yes, I'm a woman, but I'm also divine. So, she even dresses the part. False beard, kilt, Neem's crown, not because she's confused about her identity, but because the system demands it. You admire the strategy. Some historians still argue whether she was ambitious, noble, or just power-hungry. Probably a mix. People are like that. Her reign is peaceful and prosperous. Trade reopens with Punt, the mysterious land of the gods, possibly modern-day Somalia. You sail with her expedition down the Red Sea, ships full of perfume trees, ivory, and gold-tipped baboons. Yes, actual baboons. They don't love the boat ride. Back in Thebes, goods pour into the temples. Scribes scribble, priests beam. The people are well-fed, well-employed, and surrounded by monuments proclaiming how awesome this all is. Then, things shift. After her death, her stepson Thutmose III returns, the one she sidelined. At first he rules quietly, but eventually, he goes full scorched papyrus. You watch as Hatshepsut's name is hacked off walls, her statues toppled, her image erased from reliefs like she'd never existed. Why? Bitterness? A male-dominated priesthood striking back? Or just politics as usual? Historians still argue whether it was personal vengeance or bureaucratic damage control. Either way, Thutmose III builds his own legacy, and it is big. You ride with his army, arguably the most disciplined in Egyptian history, as they cross into Megiddo, a fortress city in Canaan. The siege is famous. He chooses the narrowest, riskiest route to approach the city, a classic go big or go home moment. It works. The enemy is shocked. Megiddo falls. Egypt controls Canaan. You stand atop the battlements and see the empire stretched wide, sunlit and booming. Back home, tribute pours in. Ebony, lapis lazuli, horses, spices. Thutmose III turns Karnak into a god's playground. A sacred lake, obelisks, sacred barks, and one shrine entirely covered in gold leaf. You squint at it in the afternoon sun, shielding your eyes and muttering, "Okay, we get it." And yet, beneath all the fanfare, something remarkable is growing: Egyptian cosmopolitanism. You stroll the docks of Memphis, and it's like a mini United Nations. Semitic merchants from Byblos, Nubian traders in bright linen, Greek wanderers trying to read hieroglyphs sideways. Egypt is no longer just Egypt, it's a network. In a merchant's courtyard, a Syrian lute player serenades a crowd with songs in a language no one fully understands, but everyone enjoys. You sip wine from Cyprus, eat honey-dipped figs, and realize Egypt's golden age is also its most open-minded, at least economically. But power has its price. You wander into a quiet shrine where a lone priest is chanting by candlelight. He speaks of balance, of Ma'at, the eternal harmony of the world. You ask him, with all this conquest, has Egypt lost Ma'at? He smiles gently. Ma'at isn't peace, he says. It's order, even if the order comes from a sword. You nod, unsure whether that comforts you or not. That night, the sky over Thebes is a swirl of stars and dust. You sit by the riverbank, watching torchlight flicker along barges full of tribute. Somewhere in the distance, a scribe is carving the annals of Thutmose's victories into stone. His chisel taps echo like a heartbeat, steady and eternal. You breathe in the air, spiced, dusty, laced with papyrus and jasmine. And you know, this is Egypt at its height. But the higher the sun climbs, the longer its shadow grows. Dawn again. The sun stretches itself over the eastern cliffs, and Thebes begins to hum with life. Priests opening temple gates, laborers hauling grain, children giggling through narrow alleyways already ankle-deep in gossip. But this morning, the air feels different. Lighter, maybe. Like the universe has paused for a breath. You're sitting on the warm steps of Karnak Temple, the sandstone warming your spine, when a name drifts through the crowd like a whisper that refuses to stay quiet. Amenhotep III. He's not just a king, he's the king. The kind that doesn't just rule Egypt, but seduces it. You meet him early in his reign, a teenager glowing with divine charisma and dangerous levels of confidence. It's the mid-13th century BCE, and Amenhotep III is about to make opulence his personal brand. And oh, does he deliver! You follow him through glittering processions where gold necklaces swing like chandeliers from his chest, and servants fan him with ostrich feathers that cost more than some villages. He builds palaces with names like House of Rejoicing, where imported cedar perfumes the air and harpists play for lotus-draped courtiers who've never once touched a hoe. Amenhotep III doesn't go to war. He doesn't need to. He masters diplomacy instead, penning letters to kings across the Near East, actual royal pen pals. The Amarna letters, you learn later. Clay tablets written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the day. He trades gold like it's bread and collects foreign princesses like Pokemon. One Babylonian king writes angrily that Egypt isn't sending enough gold. You say it's abundant like sand, he complains. So where is it? You imagine Amenhotep reading that with a goblet of wine in hand, rolling his eyes. He marries a powerful woman, Ta, not royal-born, but brilliant, and more than a match for him. You see her riding beside him in state processions, wearing the uraeus, that sacred cobra, usually reserved for kings. She's no silent consort. She handles foreign affairs, sponsors building projects, and appears in statues beside her husband as an equal. Egypt is learning to tolerate powerful women again. Let's not get too excited. It's still Egypt. You spend time in their court, where scribes craft hymns to the sun god Ra, and artists work in limestone so smooth it looks like poured milk. This is Egypt's cultural peak. Every surface a canvas, every wall an Instagram reel of divine perfection. Statues of Amenhotep get taller, thicker, smoother. You look up at one of the colossi of Memnon. two seated giants guarding the mortuary temple, and think he really wanted to be remembered. But behind the glamour, something starts to shift. The religion. You first hear it in whispers, inside temples where new hymns are sung not to Ra or Amun, but to Aten, the sun disk itself. Not a god in human form, but the light, the warmth, the presence. It's poetic, philosophical, and a little unsettling. At first, it's just part of the divine buffet. But when Amenhotep III dies, after a reign of over 30 years, the shift turns into something more drastic. His son takes over. You meet him as Amenhotep IV, but he doesn't keep that name for long. He renames himself Akhenaten, which translates to something like effective for the Aten. And he does more than just change his name. He declares that Aten is not a god. He is the only god. This is monotheism. In 14th century BCE Egypt. You did not have this on your bingo card. You watch the religious elite collectively choke on their pomegranate juice. Temples to Amun are shuttered. Priests stripped of power. Ancient rituals gone. Centuries of divine bureaucracy tossed out like last week's embalming oil. Akhenaten doesn't stop there. He moves the capital, just picks up the whole operation and plops it down at a new city he builds from scratch, Akhetaten, today known as Amarna. You walk through its freshly carved boulevards, wide and sun-drenched, lined with palaces and open-air altars. It's odd. Beautiful, sure, but dreamlike. The art changes too. Suddenly statues are naturalistic, bodies soft, stomachs round, faces elongated. Even Akhenaten's own image is, well, you stare at it and wonder if the sculptors were being sarcastic. He's shown with wide hips, long limbs, and a head like a stretched melon. Historians still argue whether this was an intentional style, a health condition, or just the world's first avant-garde art movement. And then there's Nefertiti. She is more than just beautiful, though yes, her famous bust kind of breaks the scale. She is his queen, his co-ruler, and perhaps even pharaoh in her own right, depending on how you interpret the scratched-out names and fragmented records. You walk with her through the sunlight of Amarna. She greets foreign dignitaries, oversees temple rites to the Aten, and appears in more reliefs than almost any queen before her. She is radiant, powerful, and somehow always a bit of a mystery. But for all its golden glow, Akhenaten's world doesn't feel quite real. The city is too quiet, the people uneasy, the economy starts to sputter, grain shipments are delayed, temples that once employed thousands are silent. You hear murmurs at the edges of the city. Where is the old order? Who feeds the gods we abandoned? It all feels a bit fragile. And then Akhenaten vanishes. Whether by illness, political intrigue, or simple exhaustion, he dies. And the city he built begins to crumble almost instantly. His successors, including a shadowy figure named Smenkhkare, and perhaps Nefertiti herself ruling under a new name, scramble to hold the pieces together. But it's too late. The priests of Amun are stirring. The army is watching. Egypt is ready to come home. So you leave Amarna, dusty, beautiful, and doomed, and head back to Thebes. You pass shuttered temples slowly reopening, statues of old gods pulled from storage and reverently cleaned. And in the shadows of Karnak, the next chapter waits. He's just a boy, but his name will echo forever. You find him nestled between the colonnades of Karnak, half hidden behind a scribe holding an oversized scroll and a nurse adjusting his golden sandals. He's not tall. He's not loud. And frankly, he looks like he's lost in the world's biggest museum with no idea how to read the labels. Tutankhamun. You probably know him already. Everyone does. But not like this. He's about 8 or 9 when you first meet him. More child than king, more shadow than ruler. And yet there he sits, wrapped in linen and ceremony, the Pharaoh of Egypt, even if he still needs help reaching the offering table. You walk behind him during the restoration of old temples, where his advisors whisper the scripts and he repeats them with a nervous precision. I, the old courtier with the grandfatherly face, and Horemheb, the stern-eyed general with zero patience for nonsense. These two shape the boy's world. And shape it they do. Because Egypt is desperate for normal. The whole Akhenaten experiment, monotheism, Amarna, the sun disk worship and artistic revolution, it's all being quietly, thoroughly reversed. You stroll past stone walls where Akhenaten's name is literally being chiseled out, erased one hieroglyph at a time. The temples to Amun reawaken, incense thickening the air, chants resuming their low thunder. Tutankhamun's first major act, changing his name from Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. Yeah, he's not just rebranding, he's course-correcting an entire civilization. You follow him to Luxor, where temple priests weep with joy over the return of the old ways. Statues are re-erected, obelisks polished, gold flows again, this time not to the Aten, but to the gods of generations past. You see reliefs of the young king making offerings to Amun, Osiris, and Thoth. And if you look closely, you'll notice the arms are a little too long for his frame. That's because they were carved for someone else and repurposed. A lot of Tutankhamun's monuments are hand-me-downs. Historians still argue whether this was due to time, budget, or a silent coup keeping the boy king ornamental while the real power moved behind the curtains. Still, the boy tries. You sit in his palace at Memphis, where he holds court surrounded by papyrus scrolls, ivory dice, and imported perfumes. He listens to disputes, signs decrees, and sometimes falls asleep mid-ceremony. He's often sick, limping, coughing, worn thin. You hear rumors about a clubfoot, a cleft palate, malaria, even incest-born fragility. Whatever the cause, you see it in his eyes. Tired but determined, he marries Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Their marriage is more political than passionate, but you glimpse moments of tenderness. A shared glance across the throne room, a tiny hand-painted box showing them hunting ducks together, smiling in the sun. It's adorable and tragic, because not long after their short reign begins, it ends. Tutankhamun dies. You're there as the court panics. No heir, no plan, no time. Ankhesenamun writes a desperate letter to the Hittite king. Yes, that Hittite empire, with chariots, iron, and a lot of attitude, begging him to send one of his sons to marry her and become king. I will never take a servant, she writes. Bold, scandalous, unprecedented, also risky. The Hittites hesitate, then agree. But the prince never makes it. You overhear whispers, he was murdered en route, the letter never acknowledged. That door slammed shut. Back in Egypt, a familiar face takes the throne. I, the elderly courtier, now wearing the double crown like it was always his destiny. You don't remember anyone voting on this, but hey, Egypt's not a democracy. Tutankhamun is buried in haste. You walk through the Valley of the Kings and watch artisans scramble to carve a tomb that wasn't originally meant for a pharaoh. It's small, cramped, not entirely finished, but it's packed, stuffed with gold, ivory, perfumes, and enough ceremonial furniture to fill a small mansion. There's a gilded chariot you swear no one could ride without hitting their knees. The burial is somber, quiet. You hear the mourners chant prayers from the Book of the Dead, wishing the boy safe passage to the afterlife. You watch the tomb sealed with fresh plaster and a royal seal, and then time forgets him. For centuries the sands shift, tomb robbers come and go, new kings rise and fall, and the name Tutankhamun slips from memory. Until 1922. Yes, that 1922. You blink, and suddenly you're standing beside Howard Carter, dust swirling around your ankles as he peers into a long, buried chamber. His candle flickers in the darkness. "Can you see anything?" someone asks. "Yes," he says, voice trembling. "Wonderful things." You follow his lantern light through the antechamber, past couches shaped like lionesses, past boxes stacked with jewels, past daggers of meteoric iron and jars still holding ancient honey. The air smells like death and cedar. And then, through a second door, you see it. The golden shrine, the sarcophagus, the funerary mask, Tutankhamun. Even in death, he shines. That now famous face, half boy, half god, eyes outlined in obsidian, lips curved with divine detachment, becomes a symbol of ancient wonder, of mystery rediscovered. Ironically, the boy who ruled for barely a decade becomes Egypt's most famous king. And as Carter's team excavates carefully, very carefully, you realize this isn't just archaeology, it's resurrection. Not just of a pharaoh, but of Egypt itself. Its myths, its gold, its dark grandeur, rediscovered beneath the dust of centuries. You leave the tomb behind, its secrets carefully catalogued, and step back into the world of the living, where Egypt is still reeling from change. Because Tutankhamun's death didn't solve the empire's problems. It merely paused them. And soon, the generals will return. You don't hear the stomp of boots at first. It's more subtle than that, like the quiet crack of tightening leather or the metallic jingle of a dagger's hilt shifting on someone's hip. But soon, the military presence is impossible to ignore. Horemheb is back. Remember him? The stern general who stood behind young Tutankhamun like a marble statue with better posture? Well, he's done waiting in the wings. The old gods are restored. The boy king is dead. And the throne, by all accounts, is in need of someone competent. You watch as the elderly courtier who'd seized power post-Tut, dies without much fanfare. A short, ceremonial reign. No real impact. No one mourns too loudly. But Horemheb? He makes sure everyone hears him arrive. You travel with him back to Memphis, the traditional military capital, where he starts purging the court like a man clearing cobwebs. Every remnant of the Amarna period, the heresy of Aten, the art, the priests who flirted with monotheism, is erased with surgical precision. You see it everywhere. Temples rededicated, cartouches hacked out, even statues recarved to replace Akhenaten's name with his own. It's history rewritten in real time, and honestly, it works. You wander through a newly stable Egypt. Taxes flow, temples breathe again, roads are repaired, bureaucracies reinstated. It feels balanced, finally. For the first time in generations, Egypt has a strong hand on the wheel. No divine experiments, no child kings, just discipline, order, and a very direct warning not to step out of line. You feel the tension of it, like taut rope. Efficient, but not exactly warm. But here's the twist. Horemheb dies without an heir, and instead of handing the throne to another general, or seizing it for the army altogether, he passes it on to a man of humble origin, a former military commander who'd quietly built his own legacy under the radar. His name is Paramesu. You'll know him better by his throne name, Ramesses I. You meet him as he dons the red and white crowns, freshly anointed, eyes glinting with equal parts reverence and ambition. He's old by Pharaoh standards, already gray at the temples, but his energy crackles with purpose. He knows he's founding something much bigger than himself. The 19th dynasty begins, not with a burst, but a quiet promise. One generation will hand it to the next, and the next, until Egypt stands tall again. Ramesses's reign is short, just a couple of years, but he's merely opening the door for his son. Seti. I steps through it like he owns the place. He's everything you want in a pharaoh, commanding, strategic, a man with battlefield experience and a poet's appreciation for temple architecture. You follow him on campaigns into Canaan and Syria, where Egyptian dominance had slipped during the Amarna years. He's not just fighting, he's reclaiming, restaking Egypt's claim as the heavyweight power of the Eastern Mediterranean. You watch scribes chisel battle scenes onto the walls of Abydos, one of Seti's most beautiful temple complexes. There, amidst sweeping reliefs and poetic hymns, you see a carved list of nearly every pharaoh before him, the famous Abydos King List, a roll call of rulers, conveniently omitting the heretic kings like Akhenaten. Seti knows how to tell a story. More importantly, he knows how to control it. But it's not all war and propaganda. You spend late afternoons strolling the colonnades of his temples, where columns bloom like stone lotus stalks, and shafts of sun slice through incense smoke like warm knives. Craftsmen hum lullabies as they paint vivid murals of Osiris's underworld. Children skip past piles of lapis lazuli and alabaster. You catch a moment where Seti pauses, hands clasped behind his back, watching workers restore a ruined chapel. His face softens, not with pride, but with memory. He knows what instability looks like. He grew up in the long shadow of chaos. And now, he's laying the foundation for someone else, someone who will change everything. Ramesses II. You don't meet him as a boy, you meet him as a presence. Even before he becomes pharaoh, his name echoes through gossipy priests, overexcited scribes, even weary generals who whisper that the prince rides like Montu himself. Montu, by the way, is the Egyptian god of war. So, high praise. Seti I dies. A long, golden funeral. You stand beneath towering pylons as mourners chant his royal name, sending his soul through the hidden gates of the Duat. And before the incense has even cleared, Ramesses takes the throne. He is Ramesses the Great. You don't know that yet. But the moment he ascends, something changes in the air. Not just reverence, not just ceremony, expectation. You follow him back to the capital, where architects bring him plans longer than the Nile, and priests line up to predict his future with giddy smiles. He nods politely at them all, but you can see the fire behind his eyes. He's not here to coast on his father's legacy. He's here to surpass it, and he does not plan to be forgotten. Ever. He stands tall beneath a rising sun, cloaked in gold and confidence, and you can feel it in your bones. Ramesses II is not just another pharaoh. He's a brand, an event. The ancient world's equivalent of a blockbuster franchise, and your front row for every spectacle. First things first. The name. He stamps it everywhere, on temples, on obelisks, on statuary that he definitely did not commission, but now mysteriously bears his cartouche. Some of those monuments belonged to earlier pharaohs. You even see old names carved out and replaced with his own, like a divine game of historical Photoshop. Historians still argue whether this was vanity, political savvy, or just good marketing. You walk alongside him through the newly flourishing cities of Egypt. Ramesses, his gleaming delta capital, rises like a mirage on the Nile's edge, massive, organized, flooded with chariots and diplomats. Everything about this place whispers dominance. Even the air smells like incense, leather, and freshly imported cedar from Lebanon. Ramesses isn't just performing power, he's exporting it. You trail behind his royal entourage as he marches east toward Kadesh, the fortified Hittite city near modern-day Syria. Egypt and the Hittite Empire have been You're galloping beside the Egyptian chariot corps, dust whipping your face, the thunder of hooves rising like war drums. Ramesses is outnumbered, caught in a classic double-flank ambush, and for a moment, it seems like this story's going to end in disaster. But no, not today. Ramesses II pulls the mother of all comebacks. He rallies his forces, leads a dramatic charge and drives the Hittites back. The battle ends more or less in a draw, though, let's be honest, his version gets carved into every temple wall from Luxor to Abu Simbel. In those scenes, he's single-handedly running over armies like an ancient action hero with perfectly coal-lined eyes. The real outcome? Debatable. But his propaganda? Unmatched. Later, the Egyptians and Hittites sign what's widely considered the first known peace treaty in history. You sneak a glance at the silver tablet etched with both royal seals, a document so ahead of its time it could be printed on parchment and slipped into a UN archive without anyone blinking. Back home, Ramesses shifts gears. The warrior king becomes the builder king. And oh, does he build. You wander through the halls of Abu Simbel, carved straight into cliffs like a dream sculpted by giants. Colossi of Ramesses, 4 stories tall, guard the facade like bouncers at a cosmic nightclub. Step inside, and you're greeted by carvings that stretch from creation myths to his own military highlights reel. Once a year, the sun aligns just right and lights up the inner sanctuary, illuminating his divine image in golden beams. It's either precision engineering or the world's most epic ego trip, probably both. Meanwhile, Ramesses is also constructing Ramesseum, his massive mortuary temple near Thebes, and Luxor, and Karnak. He doesn't just restore temples, he remakes them in his image, literally. You can't swing a date palm without bumping into a colossus of Ramesses II, flexing a bicep or smiting some poor rebel, while a dozen smaller statues of his children gaze up admiringly. Speaking of children, he has a lot. At least 50 sons and 50 daughters, give or take. The palace looks more like a daycare crossed with a fashion show. One of those children? Merenptah, his eventual heir. But we're not there yet. Because Ramesses doesn't just rule Egypt. He outlives it, seriously. His reign lasts 66 years. You're there as priests measure his jubilees, ceremonial celebrations of his divine right to rule. The first one at 30 years, then every 3 years after. You've attended 14 by now, and the cake keeps getting bigger. By the time he's old, really old, he's become a living legend, like Elvis in a name's headdress. When foreign dignitaries enter his court, they don't just bow, they stare. Some scribes from Canaan write home that just seeing Ramesses is like beholding the gods. But here's the thing about immortality. Eventually, even stone crumbles. You sit quietly as the old pharaoh breathes his last in his 90s, his body weary, his bones arthritic, his back curved with age. A long, slow exhale in the shadow of his own statues. And suddenly, for the first time in decades, Egypt feels still. His body is wrapped, embalmed with the finest resins, placed in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, surrounded by symbols of eternity. But over time, robbers come. Officials relocate him for safety. His mummy moves from hiding place to hiding place until, centuries later, it ends up in a dusty box labeled Unknown Pharaoh, until someone takes a closer look. And there he is. Ramesses the Great, hair still curled, teeth still intact, nose aquiline. Even in death, he looks like he's about to commission another temple. You step out into the desert, blinking in the morning light. The monuments still stand. His name still echoes. And Egypt? Egypt is still standing too, bruised, sure, but regal as ever. But you can feel the shift coming. Because after the longest reign in history, what comes next can't help but be a little more complicated. The silence after Ramesses II's death feels heavy. Like a theater where the curtains just fell after a decade-long performance. The crowd is stunned, not quite sure whether to clap or cry. You're standing there, alone among the stone giants he left behind, wondering, how do you follow an act like that? Well, the answer, awkwardly, is Merenptah. He's already in his 60s when he finally takes the throne. That's like becoming a varsity quarterback after spending your whole life warming the bench, while your dad basically invented football. No pressure or anything. Still, you walk with him through his modest court. He's quieter, sterner, and carries himself with the weariness of someone who's waited his whole life to be king. He doesn't have time to dazzle. There are fires to put out, quite literally. Foreign tribes are pressing in. Grain stores are low. The Nile's flooding is unpredictable. And then come the Libyans, marching in from the west with their allies. Merimta meets them head-on at the Battle of Pereira, a fight that doesn't have Ramesses' level flair, but still gets the job done. You stand beside a scribe chiseling his famous Victory Stele, a tall granite proclamation planted like a flag in the temple at Karnak. It's here you catch a phrase that gives modern historians a jolt. Israel is laid waste, its seed is not. That single line? The earliest known reference to Israel in history. Yep, just dropped in there like an afterthought. Historians still argue whether this means a group, a place, or a poetic jab at some obscure village rebellion. But it's there. Solid. Etched in stone. And you're standing close enough to feel the chips of granite flick your toes. Despite his efforts, Merimta's reign is brief. 12 years. No time to launch a building boom or sculpt Colossi in his image, but he's respected. His rule feels like a careful hand on the tiller, a quiet sigh after the roar of his father. And then, chaos. You blink, and the throne changes hands 4 times in less than 20 years. Sons, cousins, maybe even a grandson or 2 of Ramesses II all try to grab the reins. The names blur. Amenmesse, Seti II, Siptah Tuzret. Power shifts like sand in a windstorm, and you're left squinting through court intrigue thick enough to choke a hippo. Tuzret, the last of the 4, is especially fascinating. A female pharaoh, she dons the full regalia, false beard, ceremonial kilt, crook and flail, and rules in her own right. You watch as she holds court in Thebes, poised and regal, but the tension crackles beneath her calm. Egypt, after all, is used to kings who conquer and build, not women who rule alone. When she dies, the house of Ramesses crumbles for good, and from the rubble rises a name that will reshape Egypt once again. Setnacht. He's not royal by blood, not exactly, probably from a powerful military family. No one's quite sure. Historians still argue whether he seized power in a full-blown coup or stepped in as a stabilizer. Either way, he founds the 20th dynasty and brings Egypt back from the brink. His reign is short. But his son? His son is another Ramesses. Yes, again. This time it's Ramesses III, and you might be tempted to roll your eyes at the repeat branding. But give him a minute. He earns the name. You join him in the fortified halls of Medinet Habu, his mortuary temple, and it's basically an action movie in stone. On its walls are detailed, frenetic scenes of one of the greatest threats Egypt has ever faced: the Sea Peoples. Nobody really knows who these guys are. Pirates? Mercenaries? Exiles from collapsing Bronze Age civilizations? They show up in massive raiding parties by land and sea, attacking everywhere from Anatolia to Canaan to the Delta. You hear the panic in the court, the fear in the markets. These aren't regular enemies. They're a storm. But Ramesses III doesn't flinch. He fortifies Egypt's borders, rallies his navy, and meets the Sea Peoples head-on. The battles are brutal, especially at the Nile Delta, and you're pressed into the crowd as archers line the shores, firing into the sea like the world's angriest welcome committee. Egypt survives, just barely. You hear the cheers. But something's off. Even in victory, Egypt is tired. Trade slows. Grain is scarce. Workers strike for the first time in recorded history. the Deir el-Medina strike. You sit cross-legged in the workers' village as scribes note complaints. No wages, no food, no linen. They're polite but firm. It's peaceful but unheard of. The great engine of Egypt is grinding. And then comes the final betrayal. You're inside the palace late at night when whispers swirl through the sandstone corridors. Conspiracy. Ramesses III is the target of an internal coup, led not by foreigners but his own harem. Yep. His wife Tai and her son plot to kill the pharaoh and install their heir. The details are juicy. Magical spells, wax figurines, secret messages. You almost expect a dramatic Netflix retelling. In the end, they're caught, tried, executed, or mutilated. The so-called harem conspiracy leaves a stain on the final years of Ramesses III. When he dies, the autopsy says it all. His throat was cut. The final king warrior of Egypt dies not on the battlefield, but in his own bedroom. And just like that, the dream dims. You wake to a strange silence in the land of Egypt. Not the peaceful, lotus-scented hush of temple gardens, but a hollow quiet, like the pause after a song you never thought would end. The age of great pharaohs is over. The colossi no longer speak. Even the Nile, ever faithful, seems slower, more uncertain in its rhythms. Welcome to the unraveling. Ramesses III's successors inherit not glory, but a heavy, crumbling weight. You watch the throne pass through a blur of lesser Ramesside kings, Ramesses IV through Ramesses XI, one after another. The names remain, but the power doesn't. Each reign grows shorter, sadder, more desperate. You stroll past unfinished temples, abandoned construction sites where laborers once toiled for gods and kings. Now, they're striking, or simply, gone. Papyrus records pile up with tax complaints, grain shortages, and crime reports. The mighty Egyptian bureaucracy, once so efficient it could track a cow's milk production, is fraying at the seams. You're back at Deir el-Medina, the village of royal tomb workers, and the cracks are everywhere. Wages go unpaid. Supplies dwindle. Families whisper at night about bandits on the road, tomb robbers in the valley, and temples left unguarded. And those tombs? Yeah. They're not safe anymore. You follow a group of state inspectors through the Valley of the Kings, where they find tomb after tomb disturbed. Mummies stripped of gold, coffins split, protective amulets stolen. You can't help but feel it. This isn't just theft, it's a spiritual collapse. When even the afterlife isn't sacred anymore, you know something's gone wrong. Historians still argue whether this was due to famine, corruption, or just desperation. But one thing's certain. Egypt is no longer the invincible titan it once was. Its enemies are closing in. Not just foreigners, but internal decay. Nowhere is this clearer than in Thebes, the religious capital. You walk through the once grand temple complexes, now partially ruined and swarming with scribes arguing over who's in charge. The high priests of Amun, yes, those high priests, have become kingmakers. Their wealth rivals the pharaohs. Their authority, sometimes greater. You watch as they control grain, direct armies, and even mint their own decrees. And just like that, a strange duality forms. Pharaoh in name, priest in power. This culminates in Ramesses XI, who becomes more ghost than ruler. During his reign, Egypt essentially splits into two. In the north, Smendes, a general and administrator, holds power in Tanis, the new capital in the delta. In the south, the priests of Amun rule Thebes like a theocracy. Egypt is technically one kingdom, but everyone knows. It's just smoke and mirrors now. You drift between these two worlds. In Tanis, Smendes keeps up the pretense. He issues proclamations, hosts officials, pretends to be pharaoh. But there's no gold left for temples, no labor force for pyramids. You stroll through his court and feel the weariness, like a traveling circus pretending the tent hasn't collapsed. In Thebes, things are different. Here, religious ritual replaces royal authority. The high priests don the regalia of kings, perform state ceremonies, and even receive foreign ambassadors. You watch as Herihor, one such priest, literally starts signing his name with royal cartouches. A general turned priest turned king, but only in the south. You catch your reflection in a broken alabaster mirror and realize the new kingdom has become a shadow play. Egypt, once the glowing heart of the ancient world, is now split in two like an aging empire that forgot how to beat its own drum. And yet, the people endure. In the market, you hear vendors still hawking onions and linen, children still splash in the canals, farmers still glance at the sky, hoping the Nile will rise just right. Life goes on, not grand, not glorious, but human. Meanwhile, the great temples rot slowly. Sacred boats gather dust. Even the mummification process starts cutting corners. Less resin, cheaper wrappings. You're watching a civilization that used to spend 70 days on embalming now wrap a king in 2 weeks and call it a day. And as Egypt stumbles toward the end of the new kingdom, it becomes clear. This is not the fall of a city. It's the quiet erosion of greatness. There's no dramatic invasion, no smoking crater, just exhaustion. The weight of centuries pressing down until even stone begins to crumble. And still, people tell stories. In candlelit houses, old grandmothers whisper tales of Thutmose and Hatshepsut and mighty Rameses, like bedtime stories from a world that never really existed. But you believe them. Because you were there. You saw the rise. You heard the roar. And now, you feel the sigh. The new kingdom breathes its last, not in flames, but in fading memory. And Egypt? Egypt dreams. You're drifting now, through a land that still looks like Egypt, but no longer quite feels like it. The gold has dulled. The gods are quiet. And while the monuments still stand, they echo more than inspire. This is the start of Egypt's third intermediate period, though to the locals it just feels like life. A bit more complicated, a lot less certain, and way more paperwork. You're walking through Tanis, the Delta city that's trying to pass itself off as a spiritual successor to Thebes. The new kings, beginning with Smendes, rule from here now, not from tradition, but from practicality. It's closer to trade routes, easier to defend, and farther from those stubborn high priests still clinging to power down south. And yes, those priests, still around, still powerful. You float like a shadow down to Thebes, where another political reality reigns. The priesthood of Amun has fully taken over Upper Egypt. They even start building royal tombs for themselves, like kings, but sneakier, humbler ones. You pass one such burial. No pyramid, no fanfare, just quiet tunnels and painted walls. They know better than to show off these days. Even the afterlife needs a budget. Egypt is a land split, not by civil war, but by administration. 2 Egypts, really, north and south. They speak the same language, pray to the same gods, but they look at each other like distant cousins who only meet at funerals. And into this fragmented kingdom comes Libyans. Not invaders this time, immigrants, mercenaries, settlers. You meet them in the markets, recognize their feathers and tattoos, and hear their awkward Egyptian-accented names. They were once raiders, now they're landowners and army captains. Slowly, they're marrying into noble families, climbing the ranks. By the time Shoshana I takes the throne, it almost feels natural. He's Libyan, yes, but Egyptian too. Born here, raised here. You stand beside his newly inscribed cartouche and feel the wind shift. A foreign dynasty, yes, but not in the way of past conquerors, more like a natural evolution. And Shoshana? He's not bad at this. He consolidates power, reunites North and South, and even launches military campaigns beyond Egypt's borders. You follow his chariots north into Judah, where he loots cities and makes a name for himself in the Bible. Yes, that Bible, where he's remembered as Shishak, the guy who plundered Jerusalem's treasures. Nice claim to fame, honestly. Back home he begins rebuilding temple authority, including that old warhorse, the Temple of Amun at Karnak. You walk its halls, and they almost seem alive again. Almost. But something's changed. The scale is there, but not the soul. The carvings are fewer. The details, thinner. Even so, Shoshana sets a precedent, a mix of military leadership and religious tolerance. Egypt breathes a little easier. But of course, nothing good lasts forever. After Shoshana dies, his descendants start squabbling. Power fractures again. At one point, you're tracking 4 rival kings ruling simultaneously, each claiming to be pharaoh of all Egypt. One controls Memphis, another Thebes. One is out in Heracleopolis, and the last? Some guy from the Delta who just really wanted a cartouche. It's bureaucracy with a crown. Historians still argue whether this period was total collapse or just messy cohabitation, but from your vantage point, it looks like a middle-aged empire having an identity crisis, kind of like that uncle who still wears his college Letterman jacket to family reunions. And speaking of reunions, in the South, a new power is rising. Foreign again, but familiar in all the best ways. You walk into the kingdom of Nubia, or Kush, and suddenly you're looking at Egypt through a mirror. Temples, pyramids, hieroglyphs, gods, but with darker skin, stronger accents, and a fierce, devotional fire that Egypt lost somewhere back in the dust of the 19th dynasty. The Nubians aren't copying Egypt. They're reviving it. And their king, Pia, has a plan. You stand beside his army as it marches north, not as conquerors, but as restorers. He believes Egypt has lost its divine mandate, and it's up to Kush to bring it back. His conquest is less blitzkrieg, more sermon. He captures cities with minimal bloodshed and writes poetry about it. Real, meter-perfect hymns praising the gods for his holy mission. You read his stela, massive, proud, carved with loving care, and realize something wild. Pa may care more about Egypt's traditions than the Egyptians do at this point. The Nubians become the 25th dynasty, ruling Egypt not with disdain, but reverence. They rebuild temples, reinstall priests, even revive old burial customs. You follow one of their kings down into a Nubian-style pyramid, small and steep, but elegant and sincere. And yet, there's always a shadow. To the east, another power stirs. You hear the soft clang of iron and the marching of boots far off. Assyria. A military juggernaut rising in Mesopotamia, hungry for tribute and control. Egypt watches nervously. The Nubians prepare. But you just sit beneath the palm trees at dusk, watching the sun sink into the Nile, feeling the quiet dread of what's to come. Egypt has revived itself again and again, but how many lives does a civilization get? You rise into a tense and trembling dawn. Egypt is ruled by Nubian kings now, proud, pious, meticulous men from Kush, who dream not of conquest, but of restoration. And honestly, they're doing a decent job of it. You follow Taharka, the most famous of these black pharaohs, as he pours wealth into temples, orders art that glows with old-world detail, and strengthens defenses from the Delta to Thebes. But peace doesn't last. The storm you heard rumbling in the distance? It's here. The Assyrians have arrived. Not with diplomacy, not with reverence, but with siege engines, iron swords, and absolutely no chill. These are not your average desert raiders. These guys bring battering rams. They've perfected the art of terror, and they treat cities like popcorn, loud, fast, and scorched. You see it unfold like a nightmare. Egypt's cities fall one by one, like ancient chess pieces knocked from the board. Memphis is ransacked. Temples are stripped bare, royal tombs desecrated. Assyrian scribes even send back letters boasting how they tied Egyptian nobles to stakes and flayed them alive. Charming correspondence, really. Historians still argue whether these brutal records are exaggerated or sadly true. Either way, it's not great press. Taharqa flees south to Nubia, wounded in pride but not yet broken. The Assyrians install a puppet ruler named Psamtik I, a local prince from Sais in the western delta. And here, just when Egypt looks finished again, something curious happens. Psamtik turns out to be kind of brilliant. He builds alliances, plays politics like a seasoned poker pro, and slowly weans Egypt off Assyrian control. It's not glamorous, but it works. Over years, not days, he restores stability. Egypt becomes independent again. You're now standing at the birth of the Site dynasty, a last shining echo of Egypt's greatness. Psamtik I reigns with cautious optimism. He invites Greek mercenaries into the military, opens trading ports, and repairs temples. You stroll through Sais, which buzzes with art, scholarship, and a sort of retro nostalgia for the glory days. Even Herodotus, the Greek historian, visits centuries later and goes full fanboy, writing pages of dreamy descriptions about the grandeur of this era. Some accurate, some probably just poetic license. You can almost convince yourself it'll last. Psamtik's son, Necho II, dreams big. He builds ships. He hires Phoenician sailors to explore Africa. Yes, around Africa. He improves the canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea and dreams of an Egyptian naval empire. And the crowning moment? He battles Babylon at Carchemish, an ancient mega-battle worthy of its own cinematic universe. Unfortunately, he loses. Still, it's impressive that Egypt's back in the game at all. You walk through bustling cities, Naucratis, for instance, which becomes a little Greek enclave in Egypt, a hub of trade and cultural mashups. Picture papyrus scrolls next to olive oil amphorae, Egyptian priests sipping wine with Athenian philosophers. It's weird, it's delightful. But behind the bustle, there's unease. You sense it in the temples, where fewer priests chant the old prayers. You see it in the fading hieroglyphs, the broken statues left unrepaired. Egypt is trying to pretend it's the 18th dynasty again, but everyone knows that the party ended a few centuries ago. And then comes Cambyses II, Persian king, son of Cyrus the Great, ambitious, arrogant, allegedly stabbed a sacred Apis bull just to make a point, though again, historians debate if this was real or just bad PR from angry Egyptian priests. You stand at Pelusium in 525 BCE, where Cambyses invades Egypt, and the defenders panic. Why? Because the Persians are rumored to have painted cats on their shields and used real cats during the siege. And Egyptians, famously fond of felines, couldn't bring themselves to attack. Whether it's true or just military myth, one thing's clear. Persia wins. Egypt falls, again. This time it's different. Cambyses doesn't just raid and leave. He stays. Egypt becomes a Persian satrapy, a province of an empire that stretches from the Indus to the Nile. And you? You feel it in your bones. This is the beginning of the end. There's still beauty. Temples still function. Art is still made. Pharaohs still exist. Sort of. But they're mostly foreigners now, or local puppets. You watch as Darius III visits and commissions work at Egyptian sites, trying to earn favor with the locals. He builds a canal, offers sacrifices, pretends to be one of them. It helps. A little. But by now the culture feels like it's drifting. The rituals remain, but the spirit is elsewhere. You walk through Saqqara, and the tombs look familiar, but you know they're mimicking a past that no one truly remembers. Even the language starts to change. You hear Greek more often. You see Aramaic graffiti on ancient stones. Egypt is no longer Egypt. It's a cultural museum, still open but mostly for tourists, and yet Egyptians persist. Farmers still pray to Hapi for the flood. Women still wear protective amulets. Children still learn old myths about Osiris and Isis, even if they mix them up with newer gods. You stand in a temple as incense burns low, the chants fading into the twilight, and you realize Egypt isn't dying, it's transforming, and the next invader, already sharpening his sword. You're standing in the dusty shade of an aging column when the world tilts again. The Persian Empire still rules Egypt, but the air has thickened, heavier now, tense with expectation. Whispers swirl through the streets like desert wind. Not of gods or plagues or temple rituals this time, but of a name, half forgotten and fully foreign. Alexander. And here he comes. A young man in gleaming armor, more philosopher than Pharaoh, but with just enough charisma and divine PR spin to make people wonder. Son of Zeus? Maybe. Conqueror of worlds? Definitely. You blink, and he's already crushed Persia at Gaugamela, marched down into Egypt, and entered Memphis without a single fight. Egypt opens her arms like a tired grandmother welcoming a bold grandson who promises to finally fix the roof. And Alexander? He plays it smooth. He heads straight to Siwa Oasis, braving the harsh western desert to consult the oracle of Amun. You trail behind, watching him sweat beneath the sun, unsure whether he'll return alive. But he does, and with a smirk. The oracle calls him a son of God. Pharaoh material? Check. He doesn't stick around long. His eyes are always on the next conquest. But before he leaves, he founds Alexandria on the coast, a Greek-style city with Egyptian roots, destined to become legendary. Then he's gone, off to Babylon, to India, to glory, and eventually to death at just 32. He leaves no heir, only chaos. Egypt, predictably, becomes a pawn in the messy chessboard of his successors. You watch generals squabble like toddlers over candy. Eventually, Ptolemy, one of Alexander's oldest companions, claims Egypt. He grabs Alexander's body, too, carts it to Egypt, and buries it in Alexandria for good measure. You wonder, was it respect or strategic corpse branding? Either way, Egypt now belongs to the Ptolemies, a dynasty of Greek-speaking pharaohs who know how to rule but never quite learn how to blend in. You walk the halls of their marble palaces. The smells are Mediterranean now, olive oil, sea air, ink drying on scrolls. The city of Alexandria pulses with genius. You pass Euclid, sketching geometric proofs. Down the street, Eratosthenes calculates the Earth's circumference. And in the library of Alexandria, shelves groan with scrolls that hold nearly all the world's knowledge. And yes, you try to peek at one, but no cameras allowed. It's a golden age of thought, not just power, but it's also a balancing act. The Ptolemies keep the Egyptian religion alive, building temples in native style, carving hieroglyphs they can't read. They wear double crowns, marry their siblings like old-school pharaohs, and pose for statues with rigid Egyptian formality, even if they think in Greek. One of the more ambitious rulers, Ptolemy II, builds the Pharaohs of Alexandria, a lighthouse so tall it makes the 7 Wonders list. You stand at its base, eyes squinting upward, watching mirrors flash sunlight across the sea like celestial Morse code. But the longer the dynasty drags on, the weirder it gets. You get more sibling marriages, more paranoid heirs, more drama. Think soap opera meets toga party. Ptolemaic court life becomes the stuff of scandal. Poisonings, betrayals, assassination by eunuch, you name it. And eventually, drumroll please, she arrives. Cleopatra VII. Yes, that Cleopatra, the final queen of Egypt, smart, ambitious, fluently trilingual, and always 2 steps ahead. You meet her not draped in gold, but hunched over scrolls, deep in foreign policy. She's not just beauty. She's brains, strategy, and brutal survival instincts. She's the first Ptolemy in generations who actually learns to speak Egyptian, not just rule it. But by now, Egypt is already leaning dangerously close to Rome. Cleopatra partners with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony, using wit, alliances, and seductive PR to try and preserve her kingdom. You watch her cruise down the Nile on a barge that smells of rose petals and politics. Everything about her is performance, but deeply calculated. Historians still argue whether she truly loved Caesar or Antony, or if it was all chess moves on a collapsing board. Either way, when Rome comes calling, when Octavian, later Augustus, defeats Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, it's checkmate. Cleopatra's suicide is legendary. Snakebite, poison, hairpin dagger? No one knows. But you stand outside her sealed tomb as her story ends, and with it, pharaonic Egypt dies. For real this time. No more dynasties. No more revivals. In 30 BCE, Egypt officially becomes a province of the Roman Empire. And you? You sit in the dust, staring at pyramids that are now ancient even to the Romans, who climb them for fun, carve their names into their stones, and take souvenirs. Egypt has gone from center of the world to historical attraction. But what a story it was. The sun rises slower now. You're still here, still wandering through the wind-smoothed corridors of Egypt's past. But something's shifted. With the Romans in control, the land feels less enchanted, more bureaucratic. Fewer priests, more tax collectors. Gone are the Pharaohs. In their place, Roman governors with sandals, scrolls, and an obsession with grain quotas. Egypt, for Rome, is mostly about bread. It becomes the empire's pantry, with fleets of wheat-filled ships sailing from Alexandria to Rome like clockwork. You stand at the harbors, watching cargo loaded in careful rhythm. To feed the masses of Rome, Egypt is squeezed dry. Yet even now, it resists disappearing. Temples remain active. Priests continue their chants in old, echoing halls. Hieroglyphs are still chiseled into stone, though fewer and fewer people actually understand them. The great temples at Philae, Edfu, and Dendera bloom with late beauty, their colors vivid, their rituals timeless. But the sacred language is fading. Greek has long been dominant. Latin creeps in too. Slowly, the written memory of Egypt begins to crack. Meanwhile, Alexandria keeps buzzing. You overhear arguments between philosophers, scribes, and mystics. The Library of Alexandria still flickers, though no one can quite agree how many times it burned, or who lit the match. Historians still argue whether Julius Caesar's siege, Christian mobs, or later Muslim conquerors dealt the fatal blow. Maybe all of the above. Either way, the scrolls go silent. And in the silence, a new voice rises. Christianity begins to spread. Quietly at first, then fervently. You watch secret meetings in candlelit rooms, Roman patrols eyeing crowds with suspicion. But the faith grows, catching fire in hearts and minds. By the 4th century CE, it's unstoppable. Emperor Constantine legalizes Christianity. Then Theodosius I outlaws the old religions altogether. Suddenly, the gods of Egypt, Ra, Isis, Anubis, go from sacred to criminal overnight. Temples are closed, statues are defaced. You walk through Philae, heart sinking as priests hide sacred texts beneath floor stones. It's the last stronghold of native Egyptian worship. The rituals continue in secret for nearly 2 more centuries. But eventually, even Philae falls quiet. The old world is gone. But Egypt remains a crossroads. The Coptic Church rises, blending ancient Egyptian symbols with Christian theology. You admire painted saints on stone walls, dressed suspiciously like old gods. A little Isis here, a little Mary there. Syncretism is messy, but beautiful. Then comes the 7th century. Another conquest. Arab armies, swift and determined, sweep across North Africa and into Egypt. You witness the Battle of Heliopolis in 640 CE, and suddenly the crescent moon flies where eagles and ankhs once did. Egypt becomes part of the Islamic world. Arabic replaces Greek. Minarets rise beside ruined temples. You hear the first calls to prayer ripple through Cairo, echoing gently down the Nile. The old gods? Silent now. And yet, something about Egypt never quite yields. Even under new rulers, Fatimids, Ayyubids, Mamluks, the land keeps its soul. Farmers still rely on the Nile. Markets still hum with gossip and dates. The same winds that once rattled obelisks now ruffle the pages of the Quran. You walk through Islamic Cairo, past domes and alabaster mosques, past workshops where men still carve with ancient techniques passed down like heirlooms. Egypt has become a palimpsest, a manuscript overwritten 100 times, yet never fully erased. And the pyramids? Still standing, even after 4,000 years. Visitors come to gawk, just as they did in Herodotus's time. Some are poets, some are thieves. Most can't read a word of the hieroglyphs, but they feel the pull. So do you. Every stone has a whisper, every tomb a riddle. You wander through Saqqara, now quiet and cracked, watching birds nest where scribes once sang hymns to Thoth. Even in decline, Egypt resists vanishing, but its meaning is shifting. To some, it's now a curiosity. To others, a symbol, and to one very persistent bunch, it's a challenge they must decipher. You're approaching the age of rediscovery, of explorers and treasure hunters, of wild maps and even wilder theories. And somewhere, buried deep in a ruined village by the Nile, lies a key, a stone slab, waiting. It's 1799, and you're pacing the scorching Egyptian coast when you hear a commotion near the town of Rosetta. French soldiers, scruffy, sunburned, definitely not archaeologists, have just stumbled upon a chunk of stone while digging a fort. It's black basalt, cracked and worn, but inscribed with 3 distinct scripts: Greek, Demotic, and, your heart skips, hieroglyphs. You don't know it yet, but this will become the most important archaeological discovery since ancient times. The Rosetta Stone. It's essentially a royal press release, carved in 3 languages so everyone, priests, commoners, and Greek-educated elites, could understand the same decree. And because scholars still read ancient Greek, the stone becomes a codebreaker. But not overnight. Deciphering it takes patience, ego, and a lot of arguing. You float between study halls in Paris and London, listening in as linguists and scholars scratch their heads. Thomas Young, a British polymath, makes the first breakthrough, identifying that the hieroglyphs might be phonetic, not just symbolic. But it's a young Frenchman, Jean-François Champollion, who cracks the full code. In 1822, after decades of squinting at bird heads and sun disks, he finally shouts, "I've got it!" Actually, he probably collapsed from exhaustion, but let's go with the dramatic version. Suddenly, the ancient world begins to speak again. And Egypt? She's been waiting centuries to be heard. Hieroglyphs aren't just squiggles anymore. They're names, prayers, tax records, love poems, even shopping lists. You rush back to old temples, retracing carvings you once admired in silence. Now, every line hums with meaning. This sparks a global Egyptomania. Europe goes wild. Obelisks are dragged across continents. Pharaohs inspire fashion. Cleopatra shows up in operas, tea sets, and slightly exaggerated novels. Mummies are shipped to salons, unwrapped at parties, and yes, occasionally ground into powder for supposed medicinal use. You're horrified. Historians are horrified. The Victorians, just sipping mummy lattes like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, archaeologists pour into Egypt like ants to honey. There's Giovanni Belzoni, an Italian strongman-turned-explorer who barges into tombs with more enthusiasm than caution. You wince as he dynamites his way into temples, sometimes damaging more than he saves. Then there's Auguste Mariette, who begins cataloging with a bit more finesse. He founds the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, hoping to keep treasures on Egyptian soil. But it's not enough. Throughout the 19th century, European powers loot tombs like souvenir shops. Sarcophagi sail to the British Museum, the Louvre, and dozens of private collections. You stand by helplessly as Egypt's heritage becomes a global export business. Still, one name glows brighter than the rest. Howard Carter. It's 1922. You're deep in the Valley of the Kings, the air dry, your boots crunching on ancient gravel. Carter, dusty and driven, is on the verge of giving up, until he uncovers a step. Then a sealed doorway. Then everything. Tutankhamun's tomb. You squeeze into the chamber beside him. Gold everywhere. Chariots, statues, shrines, even a dagger made of meteoric iron. But the most arresting? The death mask, gleaming, serene, immortal. The young king, barely a footnote in Egyptian history, becomes the most famous pharaoh of all time. You smirk. Sometimes it pays to die young and untouched. Tutmania erupts. Museums pack with visitors. Jewelry, movies, even jazz riffs get the Egyptian treatment. But beneath the glitter, a new seriousness emerges. A growing respect for archaeology, for preservation, and, finally, for Egyptian ownership. In the 20th century, Egypt begins reclaiming its past. Tombs are mapped, artifacts are returned, and Egyptians themselves, long sidelined in their own history, begin taking the lead in studying and protecting their heritage. You meet scholars and dig teams who speak Arabic and Coptic, who grew up next to pyramids and fell asleep under stars that once watched over Ramses. And the ancient sites? They still sing. You sit beneath the colonnades of Luxor Temple, now illuminated by soft golden lights. The hum of modern Egypt surrounds you. Motorbikes, laughter, the call to prayer drifting over the Nile. Old and new, past and present. For a place that's supposedly fallen, Egypt seems remarkably alive. Historians still argue whether modern Egypt is disconnected from its pharaonic roots, or whether the thread has simply changed its color, weaving through time in subtler ways. You lean back, staring at the stars, wondering just how many versions of Egypt exist. Each age writes its own chapter. And you? You've read nearly all of them. But there's still one more to go. You walk now through Cairo, Egypt's beating heart. It's loud, chaotic, and beautiful in that unapologetically alive way that only cities shaped by millennia can be. High-rises cast long shadows over ancient mosques, taxis honk with operatic passion, and just around the corner, someone is selling fresh pomegranate juice beside a 4,000-year-old obelisk. Egypt is no longer ancient, but it hasn't forgotten. Everywhere you look, the past peeks through. On your left, the citadel of Saladin looms, a fortress from the time of the Crusades. On your right, the skyline trembles under the unfinished scaffolding of a new future. Glass towers, monorail tracks, smart cities in the desert. But your feet still trace the path of the Nile, that old eternal vein, and then, rising above the haze, you see them again. The pyramids, still there, still absurdly massive, still looking like they might wake up and walk if the wind blows just right. You head toward Giza, dodging souvenir vendors and camel riders. One hands you a pair of aviators and offers a VIP camel selfie with Queen Nefertiti. You decline, but smile. Because, honestly, Nefertiti would have crushed it on Instagram. As you get closer, the scale of it all sinks in. These structures are older than Rome, China's Great Wall, and every cathedral in Europe combined, built without cranes, without AI, just with human willpower and astonishing levels of baked-in geometry. You imagine standing here thousands of years ago, watching slaves or paid workers, historians still argue which, drag stone blocks across wooden sleds, all to raise these triangles for eternity. They succeeded. And now, people from every nation, language, and hairstyle descend daily just to stare and say, "Wait, humans did this?" Yep, they did. And they still are. Because here's the thing. Egypt isn't done being reborn. In 2021, the world watched as mummified pharaohs were paraded through Cairo in gold-lit vehicles, a ceremonial transfer from the old museum to the sleek, new Grand Egyptian Museum near Giza. You watched it too. Fireworks, trumpets, all the living descendants honoring their ancestors in full regal flair. It was half Netflix drama, half sacred rite. And it proved something. Egypt doesn't just preserve its history, it performs it, with reverence, with pride, with a little showbiz. Even the language lives on in echoes. Coptic liturgies, Arabic proverbs, names that hide ancient meanings, like the word for pyramid, haram, from the root that means sacred or forbidden. You pass a cafe where students sip strong coffee, scrolling through their phones beside hand-painted gods on old tiles. They live in a world where you can stream TikToks beside a tomb, where drones now map catacombs buried under desert sands. Science meets magic. Satellites find ruins. Robots peek into pyramids. Scholars still can't agree how exactly the Great Pyramid was built. Seriously, after all this time. But that's okay. Some mysteries need to linger. You drift now toward Saqqara, the resting place of that earliest marvel, the step pyramid of Djoser. It's quieter here. Fewer crowds, more dust, but also more ghosts. You feel them walking beside you, architects, priests, bakers, mourners, all layered into the sand like pages in a forgotten book. You run your hand across the stone, and for a second it's warm, like it remembers. Even when empires fall, even when languages vanish, even when names are scraped off monuments, memory clings to places like this. You glance up. The sky is the same one the pharaohs saw, the same stars, the same moon. You wonder if they made their choices with eternity in mind. If they knew that thousands of years later, someone with earbuds, insomnia, and a curious heart would walk their halls, probably not. But that's what makes it magical. History isn't just about what happened. It's about who remembers, and now, you do. As night creeps in over Cairo and the desert sighs beneath the weight of dreams, you feel the story settling around you like a linen shroud. Soft, ancient, warm. The rise and fall of Egypt wasn't one clean arc. It was a spiral, a mirage, a riddle with no final answer, and through it all, through collapse, conquest, and rediscovery, the land endures, still humming, still glowing, still whispering its secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. And you? You've listened well. One last step. You lie back now, sand at your elbows, stars in your eyes. The Nile, that ancient artery, hums softly in the distance. It's quieter than it's been all journey, just the wind brushing over reeds, the occasional ripple, the distant bark of a Cairo dog confused by his own echo. Time slows. And you remember. You remember that golden beginning in Section 1, the hush before Egypt rose from the mud. You remember Narmer and his double crown, the sandstone temples blooming under sun-scorched skies, the grandeur of Karnak, the glint of Hatshepsut's obelisks, Akhenaten's weird sun reboot, Ramses, that monument-loving overachiever, Cleopatra's dazzling flame out. All those pyramids, all those prayers, all those sunrises watched by people who, just like you, wanted their lives to matter. And somehow they still do. You stretch your legs toward the night, curling your toes against the cooling dust. The stars above look familiar: Orion, Sirius, the Big Dipper, but the ancient Egyptians saw different meanings. To them, Orion was Osiris, and Sirius heralded the Nile's flood. Celestial symbols mattered deeply. You think of how they used the stars to align temples, to plan harvests, to navigate both life and death. It's funny, modern maps can tell you where, but the ancients seemed to understand the why better. Historians still argue whether Egypt's obsession with eternity was a symptom of deep fear or a bold defiance of it. Maybe both. Maybe they believed that if they just built enough, named enough, recorded enough, they could outlast time itself. And in a way, they did. You've walked through dynasties and dust, through empire and silence, through mummies and museums, grave robbers and scholars, conquest and revival. You've walked through dynasties and dust, through empire and silence, through mummies and museums, grave robbers and scholars, conquest and revival. You've followed this civilization as it collapsed, was resurrected, misunderstood, and reinterpreted, again and again. And now you find yourself not at the end, but at a gentle pause. So here, as the stars wheel overhead and the desert sighs one last time, let's soften everything. Let's dim the lamps of memory, ease your breath, sink a little deeper into your pillow, the way the Nile sinks into its bed after the flood. Let the distant drums of Pharaohs become muffled echoes. Let the hieroglyphs fold into their stone walls. Let the pyramids turn back into triangles on the horizon of your dreams. And now, feel the hush settle in. The hush that comes after the last torch is extinguished in the temple, after the last papyrus is rolled up, after the last footstep echoes down the tomb's passageway. Just sand now, and moonlight, and the faint whisper of eternity brushing past your ear like a lullaby sung in a long-forgotten tongue. You've been a traveler through time, dear listener. But now, you get to rest. Close your eyes. Let Egypt fade to gold. Let yourself drift. Let go. Let go. Let go. Sweet dreams.